My name is Paul Shelley, and you're watching Galactic Historian. Welcome to my lore news segment where I talk about the latest updates to lore. Today we'll be talking about the Aremis Post Op-ed post made on March 22nd, 2022. This post focuses on the topic of the Tevarin, a species that has a lot of interest in the Star Citizen community as of late. This op-ed is titled Home Sweet Home and is written by one Camden Hommel, a Tevarin who lives on the third planet in the Aremis system, in the settlement of New Corvo. He begins the article by discussing his name and how since he was a child, he'd been asked what his, quote, real name was, to which he always explained that Camden Hommel was his real name, given to him by his Tevarin parents in an attempt to make his life a little easier in the human world. While he understood their reasoning, he didn't want to put his first daughter through the same situation, so he and his partner decided to give her a more traditional Tevarin name, with a twist. They felt it might actually work out, since a revival of Tevarin cultural heritage was on the rise, and he wanted her name to reflect the dual nature of her reality, being both Tevarin and a member of the UEE. While it isn't made clear, it sounds like he named his daughter a blend of traditional Tevarin name with a traditional human name, likely giving her his last name, Hommel, while retaining a Tevarin traditional first name. However, the hope for that life was shattered when, on October 5th, 2945, the Vanduul assaulted the planet and the settlement of New Corvo. The entire city was ravaged and the Tevarin neighborhood was destroyed. While relief did come, very little ended up in the Tevarin neighborhood. He discussed how callous the bureaucracy of the UEE dealt with the Tevarin population, and how he wrote many angry op-eds decrying their treatment, as he felt he was a Tevarin member of the UEE and expected to be treated with equal weight as any other UEE resident. However, the system seemed to think of him as a Tevarin first, and a UEE member second. While he never says it explicitly, old prejudices remain strong in the UEE, especially within the political parties like the Centralists, who range from light to extreme xenophobia in their platform. It just so happens that Aremis is a hardline centralist stronghold, with their first senator being a centralist. So it isn't surprising that the Tevarin may have been an afterthought to the survivors of the attack, if not use the attack as an excuse to push out the, quote, aliens from their society. He wasn't the only Tevarin frustrated with the UEE's casual xenophobia, and he knew many who left Aremis to settle in the largest hub of Tevarin outside the UEE, Nair in the Branagh system. Him and his partner were intrigued, and they chose to join their neighbors in this settlement away from the UEE, where the Tevarin were able to practice their customs more freely. At first, it was like a home he'd never been allowed to experience. Streets full of his kind, practicing their own traditions, serving their own foods, and their kids being taught the old Tevarin ways. He even mentions building a stone coolie field, which is a sport of the Tevarin used to play as both sport and team combat training. Camden mentions that for the first time, he enjoyed being looked at for who he was, instead of what he was. However, the longer he stayed, the more he realized that there was something extremely wrong in the settlement. Security was lacking and infrastructure was not up to snuff for the population that lived on the planet. He decided to do something about it and formed a neighborhood watch, hoping the Tevarin tradition of collective security would drive his neighbors together to tackle the issue. Unfortunately, the meetings were sparsely attended, and multiple times he was approached in his home by less than reputable figures who told him to stop butting into affairs he didn't understand. When he went to the local authority figures, they told him to worry about his own family more than the community, giving him the clear message that they valued some members of the settlement over others. For those unfamiliar with Tevarin as a culture, between the end of the Tevarin Wars and the modern UEE, it was common for most of the species to live in small pockets of bandits and outlaws, as they were pushed out of the UEE society by the Mezzers and forced to fend for themselves. If they didn't leave willingly, they would likely be tossed into prison or forced into penal battalions for the UEE army, effectively making them cannon fodder. While Tevarin culture has begun to recover over the last century, many Tevarins still distrust the UEE and have refused to return to their ancestral homeland, or the UEE as a whole, and that inherited tradition of being outlaws or syndicates is still very much alive in those who reside outside the Empire's influence, which is exactly what seems to be the case here with the government of Branagh. Camden also mentions that his daughter was being taught a radical version of Tevarin culture and history, being focused on the atrocities of the UEE against their people and a modern rendition of Rijora, the bedrock of Tevarin culture, which strayed wildly from what he was raised with. This, coupled with the interaction with the local leaders, seems to imply that the schools of the settlement were teaching a much more individualistic and militaristic interpretation of Rijora. While we don't have an exact idea of what the teachings of Rijora are, the writing team has made a comparison to Bushido, which emphasizes loyalty, honor, skill, and courage. From what I can gather, Rijora emphasizes unity, strength, courage, and sacrifice. These don't seem to be interpreted in a strictly martial sense, and it seems like modern Tevarin don't tend to exclusively see the teachings as being a military code, but more of a guide to life. So it's very likely the Rijora practiced by the Branagh Tevarin is much more pugnacious and pointed towards military conflict. The issue that Camden had with the education wasn't what was being taught, but what wasn't. The education was little other than human atrocities and Rijora, and he worried that it wasn't preparing her for the wider world. He came to the reality that, like his parents, he had the best intentions to improve the life of his daughter, only to have potentially made her life harder. He put her in a place where his daughter would be unprepared for the outside world and easily manipulated by fundamentalists, while they would always be in danger because of the people he thought would care for them only cared for themselves. As a result, he picked up his family and returned to New Corvo. He finishes the article by saying he is more assured than ever that the future of the Tevarin lies inside the UEE, blending their traditions with that of the Empire, rather than lingering on a broken past. This article really cements the divide in Tevarin culture that has been rising over the years. On one side, the Tevarin outside the UEE, like those in Branagh, wish to return to the old martial glory of their past, while on the other side, the Tevarin inside the UEE, like Camden Hommel and Senator Suj Kosi, seek a melting pot approach, getting more Tevarin UEE citizens, and to try to combine both their cultures to create a stronger whole. It also creates a possibility of a third Tevarin war, one that the players might influence in the future. That was Aremis Post Home Sweet Home from March 22nd, 2022. If you like this format and want to see me continue it with future releases of lore, let me know in the comments below. If you're new and haven't already done so, think about hitting the subscribe button. I want to thank those on screen now for continuing to make it possible for me to do this as I've been doing it. And if you want to join them, think about becoming a patron by hitting the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and remember, Ex Historia ad Astra.